What's up, Sarah? Happy Pride Month!
Happy Pride, buddy.
I am so excited about this episode and our amazing guest. We have my friend Jason Bellet, co-founder and chief business officer at Echo Health. And we had an incredible conversation about intelligent medical devices, early detection algorithms, and leading with authenticity as an LGBTQ plus founder, which was just incredible, very personal conversation. Glad to have had Jason on. But before we get into that session, Sarah, we've got a new segment to start with, yeah?
Yeah, I'm so stoked about this. Introducing Pulse Check to our listeners. It's a new segment where we look back, check in on our present, and propel us forward. Because it's Pride Month, we're going to be spotlighting queer health. And as you know, Elliot, one of the most powerful things we can do in the face of injustice is educate ourselves. And we're going to share a brief timeline. In the spirit of that, we're going to be sharing a brief timeline of the history of LGBTQ plus healthcare rights. And then we're going to empower you listeners with a list of health tech companies that are continuing to pave the way for equitable, inclusive queer care in spite of the current administration's attack on human rights. So without further ado, Elliot, why don't you introduce a brief history of queer healthcare rights in the U.S.?
Yeah, so from criminalization to affirmation, LGBTQ plus healthcare rights in America have evolved through activism, legal battles, public health crises, and policy reforms, and every hard-won step forward built this imperfect but always expanding foundation for queer health today. So we're going to begin back in the late 18th and 19th century, where being LGBTQ plus was criminalized. You had zero legal healthcare protections. Mental health fields, they pathologized homosexuality. And early psychiatry classified it as a moral insanity. Now, early psychiatry got a lot of things wrong, so...
So that's for freaking sure. I think women's health falls in that bucket as well.
That's what I was thinking.
With the theme of today's show, even as recent as the 1950s, in 1952, the first Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-I, listed homosexuality as a mental health disorder.
Yeah. And it wasn't even until 1969 when gay liberation really became a thing with the Stonewall riots, which, sparked that modern LGBTQ plus rights movement, including calls for healthcare reform and dignity in medical spaces.
Yep. And then fast forward a few years, 1973, the American Psychiatric Association finally declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, which was a pivotal shift in the medical field towards depatholization. That's a tough one to say.
It is a tough one to say. And just a decade and a half later, the HIV/AIDS epidemic just destroyed the LGBTQ plus community, and we're still feeling that effect today. I mean, Reagan famously ignored the crisis for years, and it took LGBTQ plus activists like ACT UP to force changes in drug approval processes and healthcare responses for these people. That's deeply personal to me. My uncle died of AIDS in 1993, and just to be thinking about in my lifetime, we were dealing with some of these crises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually remember in 1993, I was in third grade, when President Clinton signed the Don't Ask, Don't Tell bill, allowing gay and lesbian folks to serve in the military, but without openly disclosing their identity, which is very limited protection afforded to queer folk and definitely not dignified.
Well, then there's 1996, when the Defense of Marriage Act was signed, which federally defined marriage between a man and a woman and denying LGBTQ plus couples their spousal health care rights, which is something that my husband and I are dealing with right now. We are signing paperwork that, regardless of our marital status, still gives us each other medical power of attorney and visitation rights in case we happen to be in Alabama when we need health care.
Oh, wow. I'm so sorry that you and your partner and your husband are having to go through that right now in 2025. 16 years after the Defense of Marriage Act was signed, actually 14 years, the Affordable Care Act banned insurance discrimination based on sex, and it which was interpreted to include sexual orientation and gender identity. LGBTQ plus patients finally gained broader access to coverage under the ACA, like preventative care and non-discrimination protections.
Yeah, and it was just in 2011 under an Obama era HHS rule that expanded hospital visitation rights and in telling hospitals that you must designate visitors of their choice regardless of their legal relationship. And that is an HHS rule and not statute. And that can be overturned, which you can expect to see it.
Right. 2015, just a decade ago, Obergefell and Hodges. Under that case, it came before the Supreme Court. Marriage equality becomes the law of the land, unlocking spousal benefits like the one you were just alluding to, like health insurance and hospital decision-making rights. And but even a decade later, families like yours are feeling the need to put additional protections in place to protect and safeguard their rights if they happen to be in a state that is red.
Yeah. In 2016, Section 1557 rule under the ACA explicitly protects LGBTQ plus people from healthcare discrimination for the first time.
Wow. 2017 to 2020, a dark era in American history, according to both of us. The Trump administration rolled back various healthcare protections that were enacted under the ACA, including weakening non-discrimination rules around gender identity.
And, just back in 2021, when Biden came back into the White House, you can see how these things can flip depending on the whims of the person in office. Biden reinstated those protections from Section 1557, so reaffirming that non-discrimination protection.
Right. And now under the current administration, and even just immediately preceding him, states increasingly pass laws attacking transgender healthcare access, especially for youth. And just under the current administration and immediately preceding the second Trump presidency, states were emboldened, certain states, to increasingly pass laws attacking transgender healthcare access, especially for youth. So to your point, Elliot, it really is like this pendulum that's swinging back and forth. But I can only imagine the stress that puts on families like yours, constantly wondering if you wake up tomorrow, if you're going to have the same rights that you did yesterday.
Well, knowing how hard it was to gain some of these rights in the first place and how easily they can be taken away, we know that as that pendulum swings, it's always going to swing further back a little bit less progressive each time because it's easier to destroy than it is to create. So the bottom line here is that LGBTQ plus healthcare rights in the United States have advanced incredibly and painfully slowly, and definitely not linearly. Progress has come from persistent advocacy, public pressure, landmark lawsuits, and strategic policy making. And so that fight will continue and has to continue, and we need all of your support in order to do it. So how can we do that?
How can we do that? Well, we all know that we can vote. Right? We can show up at the polls, we can educate ourselves. But another thing that we can do when it's not an election year is support companies in the health tech space or in the healthcare market that are advancing queer health today. So we're going to share a couple of companies with you. We'll also post these in the show notes for listeners that want to check them out. These companies aren't just rainbow washing in June. They are actively building better healthcare access, dignity, and equity for queer communities. So this company we want to highlight is Folks Health. It's telehealth for the LGBTQ plus primary care community, PrEP and gender, and they also provide PrEP and gender affirming care. They're queer founded and queer run. You can find them at folkshealth.com.
And then there's Plume Health. Plume Health is a telehealth platform providing gender affirming hormone therapy. It is operated by transgendered medical professionals, and you can be sure to get care with dignity there. You can find them at getplume.co.
The next company we want to spotlight is Queer Doc. It's a virtual mental health and primary care service for LGBTQ plus individuals, especially those living in rural areas. You can find them at queerdoc.com.
Next up are my friends from Outcare Health. They provide a directory of affirming healthcare providers and LGBTQ plus cultural competency training. You can find them at outcarehealth.org.
Awesome. It sounds like Outcare Health has services both for patients and providers. I love that. The next company we we want to highlight is Howard Brown Health. It's a Chicago-based health system that offers full spectrum affirming care for LGBTQ plus patients. You can find them at howardbrown.org.
This next one is one that's near and dear to me in Philadelphia. There's the Mazzoni Center, which provides comprehensive LGBTQ plus health and legal advocacy services in and around the city of Philadelphia. You can find them at themazzonicenter.org.
Fenway Health is Boston's premier LGBTQ plus health research, primary care, and advocacy organization. Check them out at fenwayhealth.org.
And then there's euphoria.lgbt, health tech apps like Solace, which provides gender transition planning, and Bliss, which provides financial tools, all of that for the LGBTQ plus life and life goals. You can find them at euphoria.lgbt.
And there's My Lab Box, which is a discreet at-home STI and HIV testing kit that addresses LGBTQ plus testing gaps. You can order yours at mylabbox.com.
And then For Them Health. For Them is an LGBTQ plus owned wellness brand offering products like chest binders and other essential apparel designed by and for the queer community. You can find them at forthem.com.
And the last company that we want to highlight on today's show is founded by our friend Justin Ayers, Equality MD. He was a guest on Tech at the Limit in season 2. Check out his episode called Equity Trek. Equality MD is a virtual first healthcare and data platform which connects queer patients with affirming culturally competent providers. They also offer primary care, mental health, urgent care, and prescription services through a membership model. You can check them out at equalitymd.com. So again, we'll post this list in the show notes for anyone who's interested, and encourage you all to comment on our LinkedIn post and share your ideas for other companies that are advancing queer health in today's landscape.
Heck yeah. And if you want to put your dollars where your dignity is, these companies, they are not just putting the pride flags on their logo. They're putting real care into people's hands. So happy Pride, everybody. And stick around for our interview with Jason Bellet from Echo Health.
Stick around. We'll be right back.
Tech at the Limit is brought to you by Medigay, because Medicare still thinks you're just roommates. Remember when your chosen family was erased from medical next of kin forms? When you buried lovers without legal rights? When a plague decimated your community and the president didn't say the word AIDS until 6 years too late? Oh, now that you're finally eligible for Medicare, it's all happening again. Introducing Medigay, the digital health rights revival platform for queer elders who outlived a plague and a president's silence, only to watch history loop like a scratch CD of Pet Shop Boys. Gone are the grayscale government forms and heteronormative dropdowns. Medigay replaces your standard Medicare portal with a vibrant, user-centric dashboard coded with queer logic, complete with autofill for spouse, partner, and the man I loved for 40 years but couldn't legally marry until we both needed blood thinners. Track prescriptions, schedule queer competent providers, flag any facility still using transvestite in their intake forms. Our bias alert feature lights up whenever your provider confuses your gender identity with a billing issue. And with Consent Sync, your autonomy gets the documentation it's always deserved. In a country where clinics are closing, pronouns are being legislated, and the queer history is banned from classrooms but suddenly useful for AI training sets, Medigay fights back. It scrapes institutional records, hearsay, even protest flyers to rebuild your erased medical identity and files it under legend. Whether you're being misgendered by your new home nurse or denied hormones because your birth certificate still says combat boot enthusiast, Medigay steps in with real-time correctional overlays, powered by a holographic ghost of Larry Kramer and a minor threat of litigation. And with Choose Family Proxy, your ex-lover turned caregiver doesn't need a power of attorney to make your medical decisions, just a shared lease from 1982 and a mixtape labeled emergency use only. Because in an age where states are rolling back rights like it's a conservative clearance sale, Medigay keeps your dignity front and center. In Helvetica Bold, size 16, ADA compliant, and fiercely protected. Side effects of Medigay include feelings of recognition, secure elderhood, and mild technosexual attraction to the user interface. Not available in states where the word queer is legally restricted to Scrabble. Consult a real doctor, a gay elder, or your old ACT UP crew before use. And as a special bonus for Tech It to the Limit listeners, go to medigay.health and enter the promo code FIGHTMedicareFire for a free download of your protest mugshot in 4K resolution, plus 30% off your bias alert activation. Because resistance ages well. With the right portal. Medigay. Because surviving wasn't the finish line.
Take it to the limit.
Welcome back, listeners. This month, we are thrilled to celebrate Pride Month with today's guest, Jason Bellett of Echo Health. I've known Jason for over a decade, back when I was pushing telehealth boulders up Sisyphean slopes in the Mid-Atlantic, and he was changing the healthcare game with intelligent medical devices. Jason Bellett is the co-founder and chief business officer of Echo Health, a company that turned the humble stethoscope into a smart, AI-enabled, FDA-cleared early detection powerhouse. With Echo's algorithmically guided decision support tools now deployed to over 650,000 providers worldwide, if your lungs wheeze or your heart murmurs, chances are Echo has built a tool that knows what it means before your doctor even hears their pager beep. Beyond his role at Echo Health, Bellett serves on the commercial advisory boards of DermaSensor Inc. and Dieta Health, providing strategic insights to support the commercialization of innovative healthcare technologies. Bellett came out in 2012 at UC Berkeley while he was creating Echo, and since then he's gone on to be a leader not just in tech, but in authenticity. As an openly gay health tech founder, Jason hasn't just shaped the digital health market, he's also shown what it looks like to lead with integrity, courage, and pride. We've had many conversations over the years about what it means to be out in an industry that still doesn't always make that easy, and I'm proud to call him both a friend and a fellow traveler on this digital health journey. So, welcome and happy Pride, Jason.
Wow.
Can I call you
Exactly.
Jason?
Of course, I am beaming.
Pride.
Happy Pride. What a month to be here. Thanks for having me. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. It definitely is a journey, Elliot. So I'm so honored to be on it with you.
Absolutely. So, Jason, we like to start off all of our guest interviews asking our guests, be they dads or be they not, because we love pun-based humor here. What is your favorite dad joke?
All right. So why did the skeletons not fight each other?
Why?
Because they didn't have the guts. But
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. There's
They were pacifists.
they were pacifists. They were
not
pacifists.
as funny, but you know.
yeah.
Not as funny, but it makes people think, right?
I should have said because they didn't have the heart. That would have been funnier, and it would have been more cardiology related. But
There you
next
go.
time.
No,
Next
next time
Okay.
you'll know. The next elder millennial podcast you go on, like ours, you'll know what to go with.
So many out there like tech to the limit.
Deal.
All right. Well, I'm going to dive right in with a serious question for you, Jason. For those of our listeners that aren't familiar with Echo, could you tell us in your own words, what is an intelligent stethoscope, number one? And then now that like a lot of the companies in the field are catching up to Echo, what's next? Where do you see cardiopulmonary technology going beyond heart and lung sounds?
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sarah. And really good to meet you as well. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit better.
Mhm.
So Echo is a cardiovascular disease early detection and monitoring company. So we started with the stethoscope, but as you just alluded to, it's really just the tip of the iceberg for us. And the idea behind Echo actually started at UC Berkeley, crazy enough, about 12 years ago, with a senior thesis class project that my co-founder was doing. And he was talking to a couple of cardiologists and doing some market research. And they looked at the stethoscope, and one of the cardiologists said, this is around the neck of every single clinician almost in the world. It's the icon of medicine, but it's a rubber tube with a metal chest piece. And I mean, this was 2013. And so AI was like, all the rage, or sorry, not even all the rage yet. It was in the early infancy before it was all the rage.
Mhm.
But
Before they knew what the Backstreet Boys were.
Exactly. But to build on that, if you could walk into a Walmart and Shazam a Backstreet Boys song, why can't a primary care physician put a stethoscope on the chest and have a little bit of help on what the heart song that's playing? And so
Right.
the idea was, let's
Yes.
take machine learning. Let's take, like Ring did for the doorbell and Nest did for the thermostat. Let's take this icon of medicine, but make
Love
it
it.
digital. Preserve its form factor and shape, but give clinicians a tool to more accurately identify early signs of heart disease and then get patients into the right pipeline of care. So it started out with a digital Bluetooth-enabled stethoscope, and then we've spent the better part of the last decade building algorithms that are developed in partnership with academic medical centers, built on highly curated data sets of recorded pathologic heart conditions, and then ultimately pushed through and FDA cleared, like any other medical device. They're called software as a medical device, SAMD, to create a platform of hardware, software, and AI that delivers an interpretation in seconds. And so I think to your question around sort of what's next, this is a friendly analogy or comparison to Echo, but I'm just going to do it. Where the iPhone started off as just sort of a phone, but over the last 10 years, we now have tens of thousands of apps that sort of sit on this platform. We really view this, the stethoscope is no longer just a stethoscope. It's a device that digitizes heart sounds and lung sounds and ECG in seconds in any primary care exam. We can now build algorithms which almost serve as apps to screen for different conditions. So today we have FDA cleared algorithms for AFib, structural heart disease, and low ejection fraction, a sign of HFrEF. But we have a pipeline going out really almost like 5 to 10 years, like a life science company, of all the different conditions that we can build algorithms for in partnership with some of the largest pharma companies that can help us develop these algorithms. And so that is where we're heading. We're headed to more of a platform approach and using the stethoscope, again, to kind of use the Ring analogy. Ring is a doorbell, but it's a home security system. The stethoscope is a digital stethoscope, but it's going to be a really comprehensive early detection tool for heart disease.
So,
It's wicked.
but it doesn't just have to be heart disease, right? I mean, it's whatever you can find, you can mathematically equate from sound inside the body. You theoretically can create an algo as an app on that platform that you just described. So if I'm hearing what's going on in the gut, if I'm, theoretically at least, right?
No, and we're moving it from theory to practice. Being able to, and the beauty of the stethoscope is that it's non-invasive. It's relatively affordable, a couple $100 versus an MRI or an ultrasound machine or a much larger machine. And it can be sort of deployed by any provider, right? In a rural clinic with not a lot of resources, or an academic medical center in that primary care visit. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. If you can hear it, we can probably build an algorithm to detect it.
Speaking of deployment, my 7-year-old has one in his dress-up bin. I'm pretty sure.
Hey,
Now you got him in Echo Health? Really? You got him in
Yeah, no, it's not. Santa was really generous this year.
Yeah, right.
Oh, man. All right, Elliot, you want to pivot to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I got my child used her stethoscope to diagnose me with cooties. So I don't know if I can
Hey, I
really
didn't
rely
need
on
one for
that.
that. I just have to take one look at you, pal.
Co-host Burn. I love it.
Ouch. She's on fire. So, all right. So, Jason, that's all really amazing. One of the challenges that we have with the rise of software as a medical device out there in the field, and we heard a lot about this at ATA this year with their acquisition of CTA, right? There was a big topic of conversation, but smart tools like that aren't automatically equitable tools. So when you're building these algorithms, how are you addressing bias in those algorithms, especially when it comes to historically underrepresented or marginalized populations in the training data?
Well, that's it. It's the training data. And so, algorithms just don't appear. They have to be taught and built. And, whereas many other companies building algorithms are able to leverage existing data sets. So if I wanted to go build an image recognition algorithm for MRIs, I could probably go out and access a data set of millions of MRIs to train an algorithm. With Echo, there wasn't an existing data set of digital heart sounds and digital lung sounds when we started the company to go out and start building algorithms, because first you needed the digital stethoscope to even create that category of data. And so one of the things that we've been really focused on is making sure that as we partner with academic medical centers and provider groups to develop de-identified training data sets, that they're being deployed in diverse communities, and that there's accurate representation in that training data. And then that's something that even in the last 10, 15 years, the FDA has also been much more intentional around when it comes to clearing software as a medical device and AI algorithms, is they now actually have requirements as to the representation in the training and validation data sets.
And I think that's kind of interesting because as you align your deployment strategy with your continuous training strategy, right? I imagine every time a physician is recording a new heart and lung sound, it can go back to feed the model over and over and over again. So you're always collecting additional training data I would assume, as long as it's de-identified and in compliance with whatever agreements you have with your customers.
and service, exactly. No, I mean, and that's really important. People want to know how their data is being used to improve and develop algorithms, even if they are, potentially life-saving algorithms, advancing the frontiers of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the right way to phrase it. The thing to kind of mention there is that there's really high quality labeled echocardiogram validated data sets that we build as part of clinical studies in partnership with academic medical centers. And then there's sort of broader data sets of, a physician who may be using this and wanting to record sounds, but they're not necessarily labeled. And so they're not as efficiently used for improving and building AI. And so we sort of categorize it in kind of everyday user, de-identified data, and separate that from our kind of gold standard training data sets.
I love this data first strategy. It almost gives you this opportunity because you are building your own to be very strategic and have equity be a pillar of your strategy there. I'm curious, have you come up against any barriers or lessons learned when you're going to approach certain institutions or even certain populations around building partnerships with them and sort of being able to communicate the end game in a way that's not threatening, but collaborative, cooperative, and inclusive, especially when it comes to historically marginalized groups that are, quite frankly, used to being harmed by technology and by medicine?
It's a great question. We are very fortunate to work with medical, health systems and providers that treat some of the most underserved patients in the country in communities that have some of the highest prevalence of heart disease. And I think while we have certainly heard some skepticism and consider it our responsibility to explain how this is going to be used, I think the prevailing sentiment is if you can take the ears of a cardiologist, one of the best cardiologists in the world, and put it in a stethoscope of a rural healthcare worker, generally speaking, I think patients, providers see the power in that. And it's, I think we would be remiss to say it's non-invasive. There is no sort of impact to patient care in a control or intervention group. This is a really low risk way to contribute to improving the next generation of cardiovascular screening. And so overall, patients have been really excited to be part of it. And even just looking at the digital stethoscope, it's one of the only parts in the physical exam where the provider actually touches you and they put their hand on your chest and they have you take a deep breath. It's a deeply personal part of that physical examination. And to have it be digital and to have the peace of mind of them perceiving when they really are getting a higher caliber exam, that's been a great tool for patient engagement.
I love that. Thank you,
Yeah, I
Jason.
think that's incredible. I think that's a really good point about the personal nature of that moment. We've talked about that on this show before, how intimate those moments are between provider and patient. And I think that speaks to it. Before I let Sarah ask the next question, I know she wants to ask. I just had a quick thought we were talking about. So I'm kind of curious as to your vision of how a digital stethoscope like this, or like how EchoHealth fits within the smart hospital strategy that organizations are deploying, right? So we see in these smart hospitals, everything in the room can start talking to a sensor. You've got maybe your virtual care platform that's dialed in. There's ambient collection going on. There's real-time location going on. There's all these different parts of the smart hospital. What does Echoes fit into that, and where do you see that living, and how do you integrate into all the different parts of the smart hospital?
Yeah, we consider this as part of the smart hospital tech stack. So if you're thinking about what does smart primary care look like, let's start outpatient and then kind of move our way inpatient. If you have a MA who's rooming a patient with an iPad and all the questionnaires are done digitally and they are interacting with the patient's EHR, to be able to, even as they take some of the other vitals, the blood pressure, the pulse ox, the weight, the MA today can now put a stethoscope on the chest, record the sound. And so by the time the provider walks into the room, they can listen to those sounds, either, again in person or look at it on the iPad, but see an interpretation. So imagine walking into the room as a physician where you already have such a limited amount of time with the patient. And in the same way, it'll say, hey, this patient has high blood pressure. This patient has a low pulse ox. And by the way, they probably have a structural heart murmur. You should take a closer listen. And the amount of kind of benefit that adds to the provider, not to say that they shouldn't do their normal exam, but it's just that extra layer of intelligence walking in that door. Similar to that, I think on the inpatient side, being able to equip nurses going into a hospital room at 2 a.m. when there's very limited physician staff on site, and be able to do a virtual consult with a telehospitalist, have the stethoscope on in the patient's room. The hospitalists can put their headphones in, listen to those patients' heart sounds and lung sounds, and actually have a flag come up right then that says the patient's in AFib. I mean, arguably they'd be on a heart monitor, but even to be able to flag, another abnormality with the stethoscope would be really beneficial. And sometimes it's just honestly as simple as being able to stream the sound to a remote provider. That is a huge lift for inpatient use cases.
Man, I love that. Very, very relevant for critical access sites in highly rural settings too. Let's pivot to the next question because we have a lot more exciting stuff to talk about with you, Jason. Your company Echo has been around for over a decade. Yikes. Right? Like decade's like a huge amount of time, I think, in my life. What's something that you wish you knew, being a tech founder now that you're 11? What do you wish that you knew 10 years ago that you would tell your younger self?
I'm actually glad I didn't know it was going to take 12 years.
Nice.
I think that would have been really dangerous. The founder opted
part abandoned.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done. But no, it's a long time. And I think a reminder.
Glad you had the heart to stick it out.
Hey.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think innovation in healthcare is a humbling journey, particularly in in the regulated space, both in terms of the amount of time that it takes to develop the product, particularly if you have to go out and build something from scratch, which we did on the hardware and the software side, the amount of time that it takes to then get that through the very appropriate regulatory bodies, the money that you need to fundraise. It's not an inexpensive category to innovate in. But then I think what's very unique to healthcare is getting the clearance, getting the product built is just the starting line, because then you have to go into clinical enablement and adoption and workflow optimization and your early adopters, and then getting into the guidelines, and then using early data to advocate for reimbursement, which is the ultimate economic unlock. And it is a 20-year journey. And you're lucky if you can sort of make it to each phase gate. But I think that is something that early on in starting a company, we were just very focused on building the technology and needed to sort of tackle one hurdle at a time. I think the other kind of founder advice that I would give to my older and current self is to just really lean into your founder community. When we started the company, we were in 2 accelerators. We were in the UC Berkeley accelerator, and funny enough, the arch rival to Berkeley, the Stanford University accelerator. We went through both at the same time, and I very much credit the support that we got from the mentors, the investors, and our fellow kind of cohort of companies to helping us kind of get to where we are today. And I think once you sort of start in the growth phase, you lose a little bit of that sense of community. And one of the things that I love about, being friends with Elliot and now you, Sarah, and just things like this is it makes us feel like we're part of a community that's innovating and we can learn from each other. And it takes a different shape than an accelerator, but there's so much information to digest and trends to kind of hop onto that it's helpful to have this sort of infrastructure. And the ATA has been a great partner in that.
For sure. So you got to tell our listeners which one's better, Stanford or Berkeley?
Oh, I mean, come on, Berkeley all day.
I thought you were going to say no comment.
I thought you were going to go very like a political answer.
Okay, well, let me
love
be very
all
clear.
our children equally.
No. Let me be very clear. Berkeley is my alma mater. I am Berkeley all the way. Stanford is an incredible accelerator, and we were, jokes aside, an incredible institution. We were very happy to go through it, but that big game once a year, I'm Team Berkeley.
Nice. Is it all right if we switch gears a little bit? Because it's not just tech that you lead in. And and since this is Pride Month, we wanted to kind of focus a little bit on, that side of your leadership. And so you've spoken publicly about what it's like to be out in the health tech world. Your blog post on this, I think it was 2023, I think it was that you put this out, was just really just touched me a lot. So to you, what does authentic leadership look like to you, and where do you see it falling short in our industry?
It took me longer than I would have liked to feel comfortable being very open about my sexuality and the fact that I'm gay in sort of not within Echo as a workplace, but within just sort of the healthcare ecosystem as a whole.
Mhm.
And I would find that I was traveling the country and visiting various partners, and the partners were wonderful, but in sort of certain parts of the country that were less accepting of folks like myself, and kind of felt that need to kind of go in and out of the closet professionally on a pretty regular basis. And so, around 2022, 2023, I just sort of had a moment where I said, you know what, I need to sort of put a stake in the ground for me. It was the 10-year anniversary of my coming out, and say, you know, I want people to know. Before it was a little bit of a don't ask, don't tell sort of light approach. And I actually wanted to tell, because I wanted to make sure that other folks that were not out, that were either healthcare entrepreneurs or clinicians or patients, saw examples, even micro examples. It's not like I have a huge, huge following, but I just wanted people to see examples of health tech entrepreneurs that were very open and proud about being gay, and also sort of put a call to action out there for physicians and clinicians to create spaces within their practices for patients to feel open about coming out as well. So whether that's wearing the pride pin or having a pride flag, and it absolutely destroys me that we're in a moment in history where there's a crackdown on that, particularly in the federal space. And it's really sad. And I think in terms of how we show up authentically, I just came from the American College of Cardiology annual Congress. And this is the third year that they've put on an LGBTQ plus happy hour and focus group session for the American College of Cardiology members ever in the history of the Congress. And Echo was a founding sponsor and has sponsored it every year since. And it is so wonderful to go to this conference of 10,000 people and then walk into the room of the 100 openly LGBTQ plus members, and it immediately feels like family. And so many of them who, you know, went through medical school and residency and fellowship and like have just been grinding in this industry, have said this is one of the first times that they feel like they can really be authentic within their cardiology community. And so I think there just needs to be more examples of that, and was happy to see the ACC really lead there.
Yeah. I feel because I went through this, and we've had this conversation before. I feel that initial sense in your earlier career, like wanting to go back into the closet or feeling the need to go back into the closet to find success, right? I used to call it putting on corporate drag, because that's what it is, right? I mean, what's RuPaul said? We're all born naked and the rest is drag.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're doing here, or what we had to do. And so, kudos to you, Sarah. Take us to the next question, if you would.
Yeah, kind of along the same thread here, Jason. What advice would you give to early career LGBTQ plus leaders that are navigating professional spaces, and these spaces still often reward conformity?
And that question a year ago versus the question today is just so palpably different. I mean, really, it's devastating, because there's a piece of me that wants to really say, be loud, be proud, find your people. But I think now that is much more of an act of selflessness, and could have really meaningful consequences on one's professional growth, depending on the organization, than it did even 1 or 2 years ago. And so you have to really think about whether you can afford to do that, whether you really almost have the privilege to do that, given so many different inputs. And I think if you're not able to do that, finding community through other, outside of the workplace, through other LGBTQ plus organizations, making sure that you're sort of processing the impact that the inability to be out at work has on your psyche and your mental health, and really being open about that with your family and friends. I don't think we can ignore how dramatically things have shifted in the last 12 months. 12 months ago, I would say, put that pride flag, on your desk, get the mini pride flag from HRC, walk in with a pride pin, if you're an openly gay provider, create opportunities to kind of share that in such a way with your patients that it may invite them to come out to you as well, and be really visible in your community. So I think we're all sort of figuring out how this translates to today.
We're all going to be wearing colored handkerchiefs in our back pockets again, Jason.
Yeah, no, seriously. And I think if you can, I mean, I feel like I can still be visible, and the consequences are not as, aren't really impactful to me in the way that they are to other people in healthcare. And so I feel even more of a responsibility. And Elliot, I'm looking at your shirt right now. I mean, I can tell you do as well. And Sarah, just being able to be more visible.
I appreciate your message to listeners that they need to take care of themselves, in the sense that, like, check in with yourself and find a community where you feel safe to process what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're concerned about right now, until you know what you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
That, like, just kind of retreating inward isn't going to be healthy. Even if your choice is, I can't be visible at this time, because that's a totally legitimate choice, and you likely have very important reasons for making it. But make sure that you have a safe space, a safe community, and you might have to do some work to seek that out, since a lot of them are retreating from public spaces at this time. So I think that's so important to protect your mental health. And I want to call out, like, you kind of have mentioned this, but, like, for listeners that do feel like they can take a risk, or they have less at stake, or it's safe for them to speak out and be visible, now is the time when we need you most. Because there are folks who have a lot more to risk. And one of my friends once told me, her name's Maria Treviso. She said, allyship, you can't call yourself an ally unless you're willing for it to cost you something.
Hell yeah.
And this is one of those times when we really need to be assessing our situation and determining, like, are we ready to call ourselves allies or not?
Yeah.
And so I really hope that folks listening to this podcast can do some reflection on that question.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get up on my little soapbox here too. Let me just put it down here. Okay.
What I was doing?
No, I know. I'm with you, but I also want to put a call out to the LGBTQIA plus community as well, right? Because there are levels. I think you alluded to this, Jason. There are levels of privilege just within our community, and it is incumbent upon gay white men like you, Jason, and like me, to stand up for our brothers and sisters, and our non-binary family, siblings, and say, this is not cool. Traditionally, it's not always been like that. So we have to be allies to ourselves, and that's not always been the case. So I just wanted to call that out. So we're just going to keep going down this rabbit hole here. So Jason, we're seeing marginalized communities, especially the queer community, become further and further marginalized as scapegoats that authoritarians need in order to come to power, right? That scapegoat is necessary for them. And as we see this rise of authoritarianism and populism across the world, what's your call to action to industry leaders, the folks in the boardrooms, and for both tech and for healthcare provider organizations and policymakers that listen to this podcast? What's your call to action to them to safeguard against that? Now it's time for your soapbox.
No, right? I mean, we've got to bridge the gap. And I think exactly the shirt you're wearing, Elliot, DEI hire, there is an attack on intentional diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within companies, both from a hiring perspective, from a professional development standpoint, from ensuring equitable access to the products that they're building and how those products engage with consumers and patients and make them feel. I mean, it's a small example, but at Echo, there's many EHRs today that actually don't differentiate between sex at birth and gender identity. Like, there's literal EHRs used by millions of hospitals or millions of providers at hospital and health systems that they don't even have the checkbox for it. And so it's incumbent upon, I think, the private sector, particularly given sort of the erasure of DEI initiatives and what that represents, right? It's a buzzword in so many ways, but the spirit of building intentional programming and diverse and inclusive workplaces, we now have to step up as private citizens and create those spaces and invest in them. And so whether that be internally within Echo or advocating for that within organizations that we belong to, Elliot, like the ATA or the ACC, and then even as private citizens. I mean, I don't think we should be quiet about the fact that the Stonewall website has been completely erased, or that the letter T has been erased from LGBTQ plus resources on the NIH website. I'm very concerned that access to HIV, AIDS education, treatment, and preventative resources are going to be dramatically reduced under this administration. It hasn't happened yet, but that's the world we're living in right now. And what authoritarianism, populism, whatever term we want to use, the reality is people are gonna suffer at the end of it. And so we need to try to find ways to bridge the gap.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, on that lovely note,
that was dark.
Super upbeat. No. I mean, it's a good call to action, right? And it is in the spirit of building something better for this country. So
it's about leadership at the end of the day.
That's right. Right. So, Jason, thank you for your leadership, both in the tech world and in living and leading with authenticity. Thank you so much for joining us here on Tech It to the Limit. So glad to have you. And happy Pride.
And happy Pride. And it is a happy, I think just to end on this, the reason we say happy Pride is because, and the reason Pride exists in so many ways, in addition to it starting off as a protest, is to show that you can be happy and out, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So we all deserve, particularly now, to go out and have a really happy Pride, to celebrate at home and in the workplace and in the community, and show that our light is not dimming. So happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Well, thanks, listeners. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This episode of Tech It to the Limit is brought to you by WhisperGuard, the ultra-discreet wearable patch that listens to your body's deepest, darkest secrets. Got that weird stomach gurgle that sounds like a small animal trapped in your intestines? Or maybe your knees are making sounds that would make you a shoo-in for that haunted house job you've been lusting after on LinkedIn. WhisperGuard is always on, silently monitoring your every move, just like that creepy, Dwight-esque office mate who's always listening and never actually working. It's not invasive, it's not loud, it's just a patch, sitting there quietly gathering data on everything happening inside your body without your knowing. Whether it's tracking your snores that sound like a foghorn, or that mysterious back pain that definitely didn't come from picking up a pencil. WhisperGuard is your stealthy health detective. No uncomfortable exams, just actionable, data-derived insights delivered straight to you on the hour. WhisperGuard, it's like a Garmin for your body's weirdest signals. Next-gen tech for next-gen health. And before you ask, no, it's not covered by insurance. Is anything these days? But not to worry. The secondhand e-commerce market is begging for those 90s collectibles we know you're hoarding in basement boxes. Like that unopened Beanie Baby collection or your Captain Planet action figure set. Come on, your health doesn't belong on a shelf. The ROI on WhisperGuard is priceless. Are you ready to uncover your body's deepest, darkest secrets and head health turmoil off at the pass? Call 1-800-HEARD-IT or visit nosoundundetected.com to order your WhisperGuard today. Use promo code QUIETTRUTH for 20% off your purchase. Don't suffer in silence. It's time to turn up the volume on your health with WhisperGuard. Welcome back, listeners. I hope you're hungry because I sure am. It's time now to take a bite out of our trademark pending, semi-official snack of Tech It to the Limit, Wise Nugs, the little nuggets of wisdom that we like to share with you listeners at the end of each episode to kind of tie it all together after our interview. I know you're hungry, Elliot, so why don't you tell me what you're noshing on?
So much to chomp down on in that interview. Jason's great. He's always a pleasure to talk to. We wax poetic about technology. It's great to have him on the show. So I loved his metaphor around Echo being to heart disease what Ring is to home security. I thought that kind of really made that whole concept of a platform really resonated with me. They didn't start out trying to sell like this whole brand new system. They started with something simple, familiar, a low risk touch point, and just made it smarter and smarter and smarter. And from there, every new skill, every new algorithm, every new insight just kind of layers naturally to the top. And to the point that they're now building a pipeline of algorithms that's 5 years strong and more. And so like the lesson that I took away from it, if you want to build something lasting, don't try to sell the whole fortress. Just start by fixing the front door. And I thought that was
love that.
right? I thought that was really
Mic
kind of
drop.
yeah. I got my own little nugget, right? So that was really tasty one. That was sort of my tech focused one that I took away from that. The second was the conversation about Pride and remembering that Pride started as a protest with the gay liberation movement that we talked about very briefly in our opening segment. It's not just about celebration. Pride is about refusing to let our light be diminished, even when forces try to erase who we are piece by piece or letter by letter. We're watching history be rewritten in real time. The T and the Q from the alphabet mafia disappeared from places like the National Park Service's own account of Stonewall, which Jason mentioned in our interview, right? It's not just a typo. It's erasure of trans people, of queer people, of the very communities who fought at the front lines of this movement. And if Marsha P. Johnson were here today, seeing what people are trying to whitewash her out of Pride history, she'd probably be throwing a little bit more than a shot glass this time around. So happy Pride, stay loud, stay visible, stay fighting.
Amen. Love that. Thank you, Elliot. I also have a nugget about pride and leadership. So I think I'll end with that though. I'm gonna take us back to the healthcare innovation space for my first nug. When we talked to Jason about like what his big takeaway was from being a founder after a decade and what he wish he knew, 11 years ago, right? And it's that innovation for him takes 20 plus years, right? It's a marathon of marathons. And, getting FDA clearance for your product is just the starting line. True adoption of healthcare technology, as we know, we've talked a ton about this on our show, requires workflow integration, clinical guidelines inclusion, and reimbursement pathways, just to name a few, right, of the hurdles along the way. So in order to succeed in this innovation journey, you need a community of founders to survive it and to thrive. And then that was really cool to hear Justin talk about that. And then thinking back on this leadership lesson to asking him to share a call to action with our listenership. And he talked about how leadership really demands courage and also private action right now, given what's happening in the public sector. So he emphasized that in order to be an authentic leader, we need calculated courage. Visibility does matter, but so does protecting your own well-being and creating a safe space for yourself and others to grieve, to process, to advocate. At the same time, you really challenged anyone in the private sector in a leadership position to step up where public policy is retreating, and intentionally keep building inclusive workplaces, designing equitable products, protecting patient dignity. And in a climate where conformity is rewarded, DEI is truly under attack, and real leadership needs to come out of the woodwork. It means refusing to wait for permission and starting and making it a calculated decision to lead with heart and strategy. So really appreciate Jason's comments there.
Tasty nuggets. Thank you for those. Thank you. Yeah, I liked his comments about, it was almost like delusional optimism of when he first started, like not knowing that it was going to take 12 years was important, because if he had known then I thought that was a really neat comment that he made. Well, listeners, you've done it again. You've listened to another fabulous episode of Tech It to the Limit. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check us out on LinkedIn. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a comment, leave a like. That certainly helps the algorithm. And starting with episode 3.3, that hopefully you've been watching all of our videos out there on YouTube. So check us out on YouTube as well. So if you liked us, tell a friend. If you didn't like us, tell an enemy. But for goodness sake, please tell someone. So Sarah, can you send us off into the tech unknown beyond the limits with our health tech haiku?
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure, Elliot. In honor of Pride Month, I'd like to share our health tech haiku with you listeners. They legislate fear. We code louder, care prouder, pride uploads itself. That's all we have for you. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time.
How low can you go?
This low.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, this way. I'm so bad at that.
So
I think I'm really stiff.